Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for coming today to have this important discussion. Mr. McDonald, you talked about the home construction in the U.S. You talked about how, I believe you said the average cost of lumber in a home is $18,000, but that's really a small percentage of the total cost of building a home. And the reason I point that out is because I think we sometimes forget the overall economic impact to our country when home building is strong, because you have appliances, you have plumbing, electrical, all those things that go into building a home, and it creates jobs as well. In the rural communities in my district, we're not seeing too many homes being built, and we're seeing people struggling. And on top of that, many of these communities are surrounded by national forest, where they've seen a decrease in funding for their schools, a decrease in funding for their emergency services, and just overall tough economic times. I had submitted for the record in a previous hearing a paper authored by Chad Oliver, a professor at Yale, who did a big study on the carbon benefits of good forest management. And the conclusion was that active forest management is better for the environment than not managing the forest. So when I hear testimony that there's a false choice between commerce and our environment, I take strong exception to that. As the need for housing continues to grow, what are the alternatives if you don't have a lumber supply or wood product supply to build those houses? What kind of materials do you use if you don't have lumber?
Well, obviously there are alternatives such as metals and all that, metal studs, but that creates a whole other set of environmental problems that gets created. So typically what we'll have is we'll be substituting domestic lumber for imported lumber. And this is lumber that comes from Canada and other parts of the world that only because of the transportation issue continues to raise the price of housing. You know, Sweden and Germany are a perfect example of countries that are much more socially liberal than the United States in how they carry their business, and they manage their forests, and they manage them very well, and they continue logging operations year in, year out, which goes to the benefit of the housing industry in Europe as a whole, and likewise in Canada. And as I stated, just $1,000 change in the price of a home puts over 150,000 people out of being able to have housing affordability.
It seems like I heard that for every home that's built, there are 2 or 3 jobs created for that?
There's 4 permanent jobs created with every home that's built, yes, sir. And for example, the National Association of Home Builders has 140,000 members that employs almost 12 million Americans.
We're seeing new products like cross-laminated timber that are going into high-rise structures that sequester even more carbon and offer more opportunities. I've stated before that the forests need industry much worse than industry needs forests today. That's evident in my state, where we have a very active forest management, we have a very active forest products industry. We are a net sequester of carbon at 16 million tons a year. That, as I said in my opening testimony, that's 28 tons every minute, every hour of every day. During the 5 minutes that I've got to make this presentation, the forests in Arkansas have sequestered over 100 tons, or there's over 100 tons of new growth. I just can't see a downside to us managing our national forest and keeping them healthy. We don't have to make timber the #1 goal of forest management, but it doesn't hurt if the country prospers economically while we're doing good for the forest. And I hope that at some point we can understand that, and that Congress can act, and that we can move this legislation and other common sense ideas forward. Now, yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Panetta.